And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat during the presentation and also after. And we're looking forward to having Nicoleta Asalos present today. So Nicoleta, if you'd like to get started, we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm very glad to be a part of this project. Now, for today, for this meeting, I prepare a presentation about how to prevent the risk and how to success in business. Also, I have topic about financing a business. I hope to enjoy my presentation, my little course. And of course, I wait from you different questions about our topics. So let's start. First of all, I want to present the topics of our meeting to understand how to finance a business. First of all, we have to understand what is entity patrimony, what is financial statements, and after that, we can talk about an entity's sources of financing. So, first of all, I will talk about entities patrimony. I want to ask you a very simple question. As persons, have you a patrimony? What do you consider? As person, not as entity, as person. Do you have patrimony? I think so. I think yes, because all of us have a house, have a car, have a land, have goods. So one of the fundamental conditions for the establishment of the legal person is the existence of a patrimony. In order for a patrimony to exist, the existing of the following elements is necessary. First of all, the patrimony's subject is the natural or legal person who assumes rights and obligations. And second, the patrimony's object as the economic goods as objects and rights and obligations. In conclusion, patrimony represents the totality of the rights and obligations with an economic value belonging to a natural or legal person and the goods to which it refers. So we have equation of patrimony that is economic goods equal rights plus obligations, or rights and obligations. Rights and obligations are the source of financing, of the goods. The goods have a value. This value can't be different to sources of financing. That's why this equation. So now a few words about this structure: economic goods or goods, rights and obligations. So the goods. What represents the goods? The goods represent the material substance of the patrimony and are identified with the mean of action of an entity in the form of lands, buildings, production installations, means of transport, raw materials, commodity, products, liquid assets, etc. Goods are identified by their utility and value. Utility and value are two characteristics of goods and can be divided into corporeal or material or tangible, or incorporeal or immaterial, intangible forms. Do you know what is utility of a good? Can you define the utility of a good? What do you think is utility of a good? What do you think? Your own opinion. If it's necessary or not necessary. Utility is the capacity of a good to respond to a need. Are you agree with me? Nobody listen? Okay. So utility is the capacity of a good to respond to a need. And the value is the capacity to measure a good in amount. Every good has an amount in euro, in lei, in a unit. Okay. Now a few words about rights and obligations. With economic value, express the property relations on the basis of which goods are obtained and managed. They take the form of rights or own sources of financing when the patrimony holder is the owner, and therefore he or she does not have to grant any equivalent value for his or her goods. Obligations are external sources of financing, occur when the holder must perform a certain service or grant an equivalent value for the goods and in his or her patrimony. So here is another equation like goods with rights and obligation, but now this equation is different. All the goods are assets of an entity. So all assets are the totality of goods. Rights are the totality of owner equity, and obligations are liabilities. So the first equations will be assets, owner plus liabilities. Here is an application, but if we have more time, I want to make this application at the final of the course because I don't know how will be the time with our course. So this application we'll see at the final. So the second topic of our meeting is about the financing statements. The objective of the annual financial statements is to provide information about the financial position, financial performance, and cash flow of an entity, useful to a wide range of users. The elements directly related to the evaluation of the financial position reflected in the balance sheet and the assets, liabilities, and owner equity. What is an asset? I told you earlier, an asset is a good. An asset is a resource controlled by the entity as a result of past events, which is expected to generate future economic benefits for the entity. An asset is recognized in accounting and presented in the balance sheet when it is probable that a future economic benefit will be realized by the entity, and the asset has a cost or a value which can be measured reliably. A liability is a present obligation of the entity arising from the past events, the settlement of which is expected to result in an outflow from the entity of resources embodying economic benefits. A liability is recognized in accounting and presented in the balance sheet when it is probably that an outflow of resources incorporating economic benefits will result from the settlement of a present obligation, and when the value at which this settlement will be made can be measured reliably. Owner equity represents the residual interest of shareholders or associates in the assets and of an entity after deducting all its liabilities. The annual financial statements must provide a fair presentation of the entity's assets, liabilities, financial position, and profit or loss. The elements directly related to the evaluation of the financial performance through the profit and loss account are income and expenses. Income is an increase in economic benefits recorded during the accounting period in the form of inflows or increases in the value of assets or decreases in liabilities, which materialize in increases in owner equity other than those resulting from shareholders' contributions. Income is recognized in the profit and loss account when an increase in future economic benefits related to an increase in the value of an asset or a decrease in the value of a liability can be measured reliably. Income recognition is achieved simultaneously with the recognition of the increase in assets or decrease in liabilities. What is expenses? Expenses are decreases in economic benefits recorded during the accounting period in the form of outflows or decreases in the value of assets or increases in liabilities, which result in reduction in owner equity other than those resulting from their distribution to the stakeholders. Expenses are recognized in the profit and loss account when a decrease in future economic benefits related to a decrease in the value of an asset or an increase in the value of a liability can be measured reliably. The recognition of expenses takes place simultaneously with the recognition of an increase in the value of liabilities or a decrease in the value of assets. The accounting balance sheet. The balance sheet appears as a picture of patrimony's situation. That's why I explained earlier what is a patrimony, because the balance sheet is nothing else than a picture of this patrimony situation. That's why all entities make this balance sheet annually because it represents in monetary units the value of goods in correlation with their source of financing and with the obtained result. The balance sheet demonstrates its important role through its functions. First, it is called the mirror of the entity, being a means of management and analysis. Second, it is the main means of informing all those interested in the activity of the entity. And third, it is a tool of calculating micro and macroeconomic indicators and forecasting at the national level. So, the equation of the balance sheet is assets is owner equity plus liabilities. Okay. Therefore, the three balance sheet constructs are: first, assets; the second, owner's equity. It is the owner equity is nothing else that own source of financing. And liabilities, external sources of financing of the entity. And now the discuss will continue with the first of these constructs. So the assets. The assets, I repeat, is the totality of the goods of an entity. They are structured into two main categories. First, assets fixed or non-current, and the second, assets circulating or current. The first group, non-current or fixed assets, represent the totality of the economic value of investment whose period of operation is longer than 1 year. The structure of fixed assets is incorporeal, corporeal, and financial. Incorporeal fixed assets are fixed assets that do not take the physical form of material goods. They are also called intangible assets. These, in their turn, include establishment expenses, development expenses, theses, patents, license, and other similar rights, commercial fund, and other incorporeal fixed assets, like computer programs. The second group, corporeal fixed assets, are assets which take on a physical form of concrete goods with a period of operation of more than 1 year. They are tangible assets or material fixed assets. Tangible fixed assets are assets which, first of all, are owned by an entity for use in the production or supply of goods or services, for rent to third parties, or for administrative purposes. And the second are used for a period longer than 1 year. The third group, financial fixed assets, are those financial or portfolio assets represented by entity securities, fixed securities, and receivable acquired by the entity, either in order to exercise control over the issuing company or to achieve a financial income in the form of dividends or interest. The second great group of assets are circulating assets. What are these? Are those patrimonial elements which, taken individually, due to their destination and nature, do not have the vocation to stay for a long time in the entity. They include stocks, receivables, short-term investments, petty cash, and bank accounts. The stocks includes commodity, raw materials, consumables, auxiliary materials, fuels, packaging materials, spare parts. Materials such as inventory items or goods, products like semi-finished products, finished products, scrap, recoverable materials, and waste, and work or goods in progress. Receivables, or the values being settled, represent economic values temporarily advanced by the patrimony holder to other legal entities, and for which they are to receive an equivalent value or a service in return. Short-term financial investments or security are those assets purchased by the entity in order to sell them and make a profit in this way in the short time. Speculative, we call speculative assets. The last component, petty cash and bank accounts. Bank accounts include Accounts receivables, such as checks and commercial bills held at banks, liquid assets in lei or euro or national unit, and foreign currency um, entities, checks and interest on liquid assets and loans granted by the banks in the current accounts. Okay, now we will talk about the owner equity. Is the own financing sources of an entity. It represents the right of the stakeholders over the assets of an entity after deducting all the liabilities. Equity includes capital contributions, capital premiums, reserves, retained earnings, results for the financial year. In prepare the financial statements, the entities adopt the financial concept of capital. According to this concept, capital is synonymous with the entity's net assets or owner's equity. Owner's equity consists of the contribution of associates and stakeholders through self-financial and other non-reimbursable financial sources. Specifically, it includes share capital, capital premiums, revaluation reserves, retained earnings, and the result of the exercise, current profit or current loss. We discuss each of these components of owner equity. So, first of all, share capital is constituted at the establishment of the company through the contribution of the associates or stakeholders, a money contribution or a contribution in kind. The share capital is divided according to the legal status of the entity into equal fractions called shares or stocks. The share capital can be subscribed and unpaid when the contributions have not yet been actually made available to the entity, and subscribed and paid up when all the contributions have been made available to the entity. Share capital can undergo increase or decrease operations during the life of the entity. Capital premiums and revaluation reserves. Capital premiums appear as a result of operations to increase and share capital through money, in-kind contributions or through mergers, and include share, merger, contribution, or and conversion premiums. Share premium is the difference between the price of the new shares or stocks issued in their nominal value. Merger premium is the difference between the value of the contribution resulting from the merger and the value by which the share capital of the acquiring company increased. Contribution premium is the difference between the value of the contributed goods and the nominal value of the share capital with which these contributions were paid. Revaluation reserves represent the counterpart of the value, gain, or loss created by the revaluation of corporeal and financial fixed assets. Reserves and retained earnings. Reserves can be legal, statutory, or contractual reserves and other reserves. The legal reserves are constituted annually from the entity's profit within the quotas and the limits stipulated by law, and from the other sources stipulated by law. Legal reserves can be used only under the conditions stipulated by law. The statutory or contractual reserves are constituted annually from the net profit of the entity according to the provisions of its constitutive act. Other reserves not stipulated by law or by the statute can be constituted on an optional basis regarding the net profit to cover accounting losses or for the other purposes, according to the decision of the general meeting of shareholders or associates in compliance with the legal provisions. Retained earnings is that result or part of a result whose financial impact has been postponed by the general meeting or of shareholders. It can take two forms: a positive result, carried forward undistributed profit, or negative result, carrying forward uncovered loss. The liabilities. What is the liabilities? A liability is a current obligation of the entity arising from the past events, the settlement of which is expected to result in an outflow from the entity of resources embodying economic benefits. Liabilities are external sources of financing that arise and operate from the time of entering of agreement with the third parties until their settlement. Liabilities are divided in the balance sheet into current and non-current. Liabilities can be divided into several categories depending on the operations that generate them. So, we will have commercial liabilities to suppliers of fixed assets, stocks, or of overall materials, commodities, etc. Fiscal liabilities to the local and central administration being represented by taxes. Wages liabilities to the employees of the entity being represented by wages or other personal rights. Social liabilities representing contributions to insurance or social protection, and to the associates or shareholders' liabilities are consisting in the dividends due for the subscribed capital. Now we talk about the second statement, the profit and loss account. The profit and loss account's role in reflecting company's performance. This is the first subject about the profit and loss account. What is the role of this document in the entity? The profit and loss account is the accounting modeling tool that explains the way the result is obtained and allows drawing conclusions related to the performances of the activity of the entity. The qualitative structures that are represented and compared in these synthetical accounting documents are income and expenses. Income is the values produced and sold on the market to customers, and the expenses are the values used to obtain income, which are in fact costs incurred on the other markets. After comparing the two values, a result will be obtained, which can have two forms. A positive value called profit, when income is higher than the expenses, and a negative value called loss, when income is lower than expenses. The evaluation and registrations of expenses in financial accounting is done according to their nature. So we have operating expenses and financial expenses. The first of them, operating expenses, includes expenses with stocks, with raw materials and consumables, the acquisition cost of the consumed inventory objects, the value of consumed energy and water, the cost of sold goods and packaging. Other expenses are with on services performed by third parties, royalties, tenancy, and rents. Expensive with other services performed by third parties, collaborators. Commissions and fees, protocol advertising and publicity expenses, postal expenses and telecommunications, taxes, banking services, and others. Another group of expenses, as of operating expenses, are personnel expenses. Wages, insurance and social protections, and other personal expenses borne by the entity. So the other operating expenses. The second group of expenses are financial expenses, which include expenses regarding the assigned financial investments, unfavorable exchange rate differences, interest in the current financial year, and discounts granted to customers. Now let's talk about the income. Income is the increase in economic benefits recorded during the accounting period in the form of inflows or increases in assets or decreases in liabilities, which result in increases in owners' equity other than those resulting from contributions from associates or stakeholders. The organizations and the registrations of income in accounting is done according to their natures as follows: operating income and financial income. What is operating income and what is financial income? Operating income, it refers of income from the sale of products and commodities as well as from performing services, income related to the production cost, income from the production and of fixed assets, income from operating subsidiaries, and other income from the current operations. Financial income includes income from financial fixed assets, income from short-term investment, income from assigned financial investments, income from exchange rate differences, income from interest, income from discounts received as a result of financial reductions, and other financial income. So, now is the third of our topic from today, an entity's resources of financing. Here is here are all the sources. The potential sources of funding for financing the activity are: first of them, own funds and funds borrowed from the family and friends. The second, bank loans. Third, issue shares, issue bonds, financing from special programs. 6, venture capital funds. 7, leasing. 8, credits from suppliers and customers. And 9, commercial bills credits, that it means factoring and discounting. First of them, own funds and funds borrowed from the family and friends, close persons. These are the most common starting point from small and new businesses. Financial institutions are less open, especially in times of economic instability, to startups than to those with an already well-defined history. One's own funds offer the advantage of a greater security. They will not be withdrawn in a case of deterioration of the financial situation, as in the case of a loan bank loan. It is not necessary to reveal the detailed business's plan to external partners or to obtain their approval for making important decisions. This financing resource therefore ensures flexibility, security, and independence. At the same time, from the perspective of attracting sources of financing external of the company, the engagement of one's own funds represents a guarantee of the entrepreneur's motivation for ensuring the success of the business. The disadvantages of financial from one's own sources are also important. One's own funds are generally quite limited and can slow down the development of the business. And second, in a case of failure, the loss will be borne entirely by the entrepreneur or those close to him or her. The third, the company will be less known by the financial institutions and it will be more difficult to raise funds in special situations. The second financial source, bank loans, major source of funding, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. What is the advantages of this kind of source, bank loans? First, obtain additional funds additional to one's own. Second, establishing a relationship with a known financial institution, easier access to other services provided by the bank. 3. Obtain a loan can function as a signal that certifies the viability of the businesses in front of other potential investors. 4. In the case of certain forms of credit, there is a degree of flexibility regarding the committed amounts, the dates of which the respective amounts are committed, and the interest and the repayment terms. 5. The need to convince the bank of the viability of the businesses or the simple filling of a loan application can force the entrepreneur to objectively analyze his or her business to obtain a clear picture of its financial situation and a picture of the weakness, strengths, opportunities, and threats that characterize the company's situation. The disadvantages of the loan banks are, first, banks' reluctance regarding the financing of new companies. The bank needing the certainty that it will get back the money granted as credit, while the newly established companies do not offer this guarantee for various reasons. Like they have no history, no experience, they do not have many elements that make this company stable elements in the economy. Second, the risk of losses, the deposit guarantees, or even the risk of bankruptcy in case of not repayment of the loan. The third, involvement of an external factor in the company's management, the appearance of restrictions. 4. Exposure to new risk. For example, the risk of the interest rate. 5. The risk of the interruption of the credit in case of unfavorable events for the company. Another source of financing is issuing shares and bonds. Is an important source of funding for large companies, but it is less accessible to startups. Another source was special financing programs. Companies have access to various non-reimbursable financing programs. Potential sources of financing are European Union programs. Obtaining such financial involves first, being permanently informed of the existing programs, studying the eligibility criteria, the necessary documentation, the terms of submitting the financing applications, and the condition for carrying out the financing and for evaluating the project. Third, selecting the alternatives suitable for the company's activity profile. And 4, applying the necessary documentation and submitting the project. It is advisable to rigorously evaluate the chances of success of the application for funding before initializing it. Inefficient consumption of time and money can thus be avoided. It is possible that the program itself suggests possibility for expanding or diversifying the company's activity. Before embarking to this part, the entrepreneur will be need to correctly estimate the effects of such a strategic move. The funds granted in theoretically advantageous conditions can prove to a problem if the company does not have the capacity to use them under the conditions provided by the financer. Okay. Venture capital funds are specialized sources of financing for investments where the probability of failure is higher, but success cases are enough to compensate for the losses. The venture fund invests in the company's capital, usually as a minority shareholder, and we will draw this participation after a certain period, usually after 3 or 5 years. The venture fund gains from the difference between the value of the participation between the moment of making the investment and that of the liquidation of its participation to the company's capital. Leasing, another source of financing. Leasing is a special form of medium and long-term lending operations for the purchase in general of industrial equipment. The equipment is bought by the leasing company and is then rented to the applicant. Frequently, the applicant himself is mandated by behalf of the leasing company to buy the equipment she or he needs. The leasing contract is then concluded between the leasing company and the applicant, and through this contract, the applicant receives the equipment for use. This form of leasing is also called commercial leasing and is the main form of leasing. Special forms of leasing are leaseback and time sharing. In the form of leaseback, the owner of the equipment is the applicant who urgently needs money. In this case, he or she sells the equipment to a leasing company, then rents it from the latter. In the form of time sharing, there are several applicants who want to use the same equipment, and each one uses it for a certain period of time. Regardless of the form in which the leasing is done, in the end of the period, the applicant has several options. First, the termination of the contract. The second, continuing it for a new period of time, or buying the equipment at the predetermined price. Another source of financing is credits from suppliers and customers. From the moment the company received the goods or services delivered by the suppliers and until the moment of the actual payment, and the entrepreneur actually benefits from a credit from the supplier. A similar situation arises if the company's customers pay in advance. Obviously, this type of mutual financing is done between business partners who are trusting each other, and the amounts that are circulated are not very large, but they are enough to optimize the cash flow of a company for a short period of time. It is in the company's interest to extend the payment period of the suppliers, and at the same time to collect its receivables as soon as possible. This optimization should not, however, affect the company's business's relationship. Accumulating excessive debts between partners can lead to financial gridlocks. Knowing the alternative payments methods and advantages negotiation of contracts in this regard can prove extremely useful in the management of the company. Factoring and discounting. Factoring is a form of short-term lending granted by commercial banks by compensating the supplier credit. The loan is guaranteed with an invoice before the due date arising from a sale purchase contract between a supplier and the buyer. From a legal point of view, factoring is a contract concluded between the bank, the factor, and the client, the adherent, by which the factor, the bank, undertakes to pay upon the presentation of the documents certifying a commercial receivable a certain amount of money in exchange for a commission. Discounted is a form of short-term lending granted by commercial banks by paying before the maturity of some commercial bills of exchange, promissory notes, etc. Discounting represents an operation of purchase by the banks of the commercial bills held by their clients in exchange for granted a discount credit and the retention of the bank of an amount called agio, made up of the value of the discount added to the commissions. So, I want to go back to our application. Here is this application. Can you write it? And after that, maybe we can solve it. Do you need a little spare time?
Yes, I believe they will need a little bit of time to process because it's really a lot of information. And if you can leave your details and perhaps contact you by email or something
Oh,
like that.
yes. My address is N Nasalos 20. Nasalos 20.
Do you want to maybe write it in the chat real quickly?
Oh, yes, yes,
That
yes.
would be great.
I write to you, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Is better.
Mhm.
And if you have no question for right now, I wish you all the best.
Thank you, you too.